please define a quote-unquote vulnerable adult. Seniors, for example, question mark. What's a vulnerable adult?
A vulnerable adult is an adult with a recognized physical, emotional, or mental incapacity.
Anything to add?
So a senior is not a vulnerable adult. You know, that's often maybe an assumption that people make, but if they qualify under those other areas, because they're unable to protect themselves. You know.
I like this question. I won't go to the panel. It says, how to start the insurance process with you. So I guess I did a good sales job. This question started off about should criminal reference checks be done every 3 years? We've discussed that and I've explained why, but the next part of the question is, can we use a reference check, a background reference check? And perhaps this should be maybe the question criminal reference or criminal check as well, that's been done for a volunteer at another organization, like a school.
Not actually, can you use a record check from another organization?
Yeah. So again, the idea is, and it's related to a question we get, we went to a volunteer and said, we need you to do a criminal record check, and they say, well, we just did one 3 months ago or 6 months ago for a school or for another organization.
I would think out of an abundance of caution, no, you would get your own record check to confirm that it was, get your own record check so that you can confirm that it was secured properly, etc., etc. I wouldn't rely on anybody else's record check ever.
And that would certainly be our answer as well. It's got to be a reference or a criminal record check that's done specifically for this job and this role. And maybe Judi can talk about this a little bit, but you know, again, older criminal record checks, they're only good on the day that they were done. Photocopies can be manipulated. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
One of the things that I think needs to be followed through on in your application, you have provisions for references. You need to contact the references. The simple statement of who you can contact isn't adequate. You have to make the effort of inquiring, and I think failure to do that will probably indicate that you haven't done the due diligence that's necessary.
Just going back to criminal record checks, they should be the original document. The document should have a seal on it. Some churches have not kept it. They've said, hey, that's nice, and handed it back to the person, so then they've taken it to another organization. You need that for your due diligence. That's what needs to be in your file, your original document showing the seal.
Next question is, please discuss the pros and cons of installing security cameras, recorded tapes for the protection of children and employees and volunteers on our premises.
Well, the only thing is I mean, legally under the criminal code, you have to make sure that you are putting up signs and notices that let people know that they are being videotaped in a certain area. For example, my church, we're just finished renovating our back and we're putting security cameras in. But that's one of the things you have to do. You have to make sure that you are giving notice that that area is being videotaped.
Is someone watching all the videotape that's being done? Are you watching it live continuously? Because if you're not watching it, you just have that tape, then abuse could be happening without your knowledge. So it's a false sense of comfort to rely on that, unless you have somebody full-time watching that.
Okay, the next question is, in order to qualify for abuse coverage, do we have to adhere exactly to the operational procedures? For example, 2 unrelated adults supervising children at all times.
In our declaration, we talk about 2 adults. We have some alternatives. 1 adult with an open door policy. The old split doors, maybe in a nursery setting. I mean, that's an ideal setting, way to do it. Having windows in your rooms with a screened adult. Having a designated monitor going through. So the ideal is you've got 2 unrelated adults in the class, but guess what happens? Somebody needs to go somewhere, there's an emergency, and you only have 1 adult, so you rely back on the second item, either doors in the classroom, windows in the doors, or there's a designated monitor, or you open the door in that case, you leave it open so that you can be transparent.
I believe that hall monitor really it's really your saving grace. Have your ushers screened and trained along with your children's pastors and volunteers. Recruitment is such a challenge for children's pastors. So to try to attempt to have 2 adults in every classroom is a huge challenge. I hear this all the time. So we would recommend 2 screened, unrelated adults in every classroom. However, that trained, screened hall monitor doing both scheduled walks through the halls and also those sporadic visits and walks through the halls really will help each one of our churches and organizations comply to those procedures.
One of the things that I think churches should consider as well is, it's nice to get volunteers, but you should consider volunteers as being on probation for a period of time as well. You need to be assessing on an ongoing basis their performance. Are they the right people for the job? Are there concerns that are raised? Ask questions of people who they're interacting with. And if in fact they're not performing as they should, then there should be a means of redirecting them to another ministry within the church. But just because someone volunteers isn't necessarily that they're the right person for the job. That warm seat doesn't mean to say that they're qualified.
If we qualify for abuse coverage, what happens if the church falls short in any of the areas and there are allegations? Will there still be coverage? For example, they miss screening an individual and they are charged with abuse. And I think I'm going to answer this question. There's a concept in insurance that when you take out an insurance policy, when you fill out an application to get coverage, there is utmost good faith involved, because what the insurance company is doing is they're accepting you at your word and they're providing coverage and premium accordingly. Now the question is, we filled our application out, there's an inaccuracy in it, does that cause our claim to be denied? The answer is generally no. In fact, there's a concept in law called contra preferendum, which means that he who drafts an application or a question or a form, if it's not 100% clear, then the benefit goes to the person who signs the contract, right? Do you understand that? And in insurance, if there's an inaccuracy on the application, the only way an insurance company is going to be able to deny a claim is if the claim was related directly to that question. In other words, we have a term called material. It was material to underwriting the risk. If you'd answered the question accurately, we would never have given you this coverage, and therefore it's material. So in general, the answer would be, you would have to be a material misrepresentation. For example, let me give you an extreme example, and one that's already happened. We had a church that qualified for abuse coverage based on the abuse prevention declaration that they filled out and gave to us. We removed the exclusion and gave them full coverage. At some point afterwards, we became aware of abuse allegations at the church, and in the investigation afterwards it came to light that in fact they didn't do criminal record checks on anybody. So far, it's actually not material misrepresentation. Actually, not even at this point. But in actual fact, one of the people, the person who committed the abuse, had a prior record. So had they checked, they would have found it out. That's material. Okay? So again, the deck is stacked actually against insurance companies, but it has to be material misrepresentation that relates to a claim, generally speaking. I don't know if you had any legal insights or comments on this question.
I speak predominantly to children's pastors and youth pastors on this topic. And I would say 80% of the children's pastors and youth pastors I talk to have never seen those declaration forms. But they are the ones that are appointed to implement an abuse prevention program in their church. It is really critical that you complete that declaration form with those that are implementing abuse prevention in your church. They will know whether or not there is compliance, and it will be a great learning experience for them also to make sure that they see the insurance liability and the legal responsibility they have to not drop the ball.
We operate several summer camps involving either teens or preteens. We practice the 2-adult rule, but it's difficult to do so 100% of the time. Examples are Johnny needs to go to the bathroom, and it is 2 a.m. Do both counselors have to be awakened to go with him? If so, this could wear down the counselors. Not that they're not staying up late on their own accord, right? So, do they let him go by himself? What if a predator, actually when I read predator at first I was thinking more of a bear, but we're talking about a sexual predator. Sorry, it's been a long day. What if a sexual predator, it could be another staff member or representing the organization, is waiting? How do you suggest the situation be handled? Sometimes theory and reality conflict, or it's hard to implement practical procedures.
That's a tough one, and the unfortunate thing is, after there's been an abuse, you're going to be measured by the standard that will probably be the highest standard. And so to avoid, the right answer is wake the other guy up, and now you got the problem, you got a bunch of kids sleeping in a room, and there's no adult there at all. So it's a very difficult situation to be in. I would think certainly as a minimum, you never let the child go by himself. You would take another person with that child, so there's 2 kids. You're not going to have someone making an allegation that you, as an adult, abused the child while you're out. When you come back, hopefully, there is no incident. Nothing's happened in the sleeping area while you've been gone. While the child's in the washroom, the door should be left open, and if there's an undue length of time the child's taking, you should be calling in and asking what's going on. But you don't necessarily want to be in the washroom with them.
Check that it's empty too.
And the other thing is to check to make sure that the washroom is empty before the child goes in.
The next question is, in the case where there are 2 or more churches, I'm going to make some assumptions with this question, but parent-sister church, parent-daughter churches, each church or each congregation, maybe that's the better way to say it, currently has their own insurance coverage. If there's a lawsuit to occur against one of the other divisions, how would this impact the organization as a whole? Would each church be responsible for its own jurisdiction? These are recommended that an insurance policy be taken out for the organization in general, and each church should continue to have its own coverage. I'm actually going to refer this question to David, but I can think of so many ways I can go on about this, like, is this one organization operating with multiple congregations, and how centralized is the authority, and who's minding the shop? But I'm going to let David go at this one.
You're right on point, Ken, in terms of trying to analyze it. It's what is the corporate structure of the, is it a denominational church? Are the camps run by denomination? Do churches have some legal obligation to support the programs? The ideal would be to have a policy in place to cover the party that's the owner and the runner of the camp. Very often, it's a number of organizations that are participating in that ministry, and they should probably be looking at their own individual coverages to make sure that they're covered for these types of activities that might be viewed as outside activities.
What happens from an insurance standpoint is professionals, one of the things we try to do is on our applications, ask a lot of questions to elicit a lot of answers so we can understand the nature of the organization. And sometimes, and it's not necessarily with this case, but sometimes organizations are very clear about their structure, they understand how they work, and other organizations are a little unclear as to how they're really operating. And that's a dangerous place to be, because if it's multiple congregations but it's one organization, do they all have their own boards, and are they really boards or just committees? And what's the constitutional structure? Do they have abuse prevention plans in place? And then does a lack of procedure cause a claim or a liability suit at one location and then jeopardize the legal liability, personal liability, and assets of the organization collectively? So a lot of questions. You need to understand your structure clearly.